The corridor outside the House Oversight Committee chamber buzzed with that tense, pre-hearing electricity that only Washington could generate. Reporters jostled for camera positions, aides hustled in and out with stacks of papers, and the low hum of whispered conversations blended together like distant static. But beneath it all, there was an unmistakable undercurrent. Everyone sensed today was going to be different. Senator John Kennedy walked down the hall with his usual unhurried stride, a small stack of index cards tucked under his arm and a faint half-smirk easing across his face. The Louisiana senator had a reputation, folksy, sharp, sometimes deceptively so, and whenever he appeared at a House hearing, it was either because something had gone very wrong or was about to. Today, the cameras were here for one person, Representative Ilhan Omar. She had been at the center of political storms before, but the allegations that had snowballed over the past week were unlike anything she had faced. Nothing criminal, nothing officially proven, but a swirl of questions, contradictions, and accusations surrounding an investigative report about overseas consulting ties and conflicting statements she had made publicly. The hearing was intended to clarify the discrepancies. Washington translation: somebody was about to get grilled. Omar entered the chamber flanked by aides, her expression tightly guarded. But beneath the stoicism, she knew this wasn't going to be easy. The committee was divided, half eager to defend, half eager to pounce. But one wildcard had been inserted at the last minute. Senator John Kennedy had been invited to contribute questions due to his seat on the Joint Ethics Subcommittee reviewing the issue. No one expected him to speak much. No one expected him to speak last. The hearing opened with routine formalities, witness instructions, and a series of long, meandering speeches that felt more like campaign ads than inquiries. Kennedy sat silently, jotting occasional notes on his tiny cards, tilting his head in that manner he had, somewhere between curiosity and a man hearing an outrageous rumor at a bar. For nearly an hour, Omar held firm. She pushed back where necessary, clarified where she could, defended her record passionately. Even her critics grudgingly admitted she was good in these settings, calm, composed, quick thinking. But then the questions shifted to the investigative report released 3 days earlier. The report had alleged that she had provided contradictory explanations about her connections to a nonprofit organization operating in East Africa. The nonprofit had been accused, by a rival faction, of funneling funds into political advocacy campaigns in the U.S., which would be a violation if true. Omar had denied involvement entirely, then later admitted she had limited engagement, and then a leaked email suggested she might have had more contact than previously stated. The contradictions were not career-ending on their own. Washington was full of contradictions. But when credibility was in question, everything else began to wobble. She answered carefully, but the answers weren't landing clean. The committee members exchanged looks. Reporters typed faster. Cameras zoomed in. And John Kennedy had not yet spoken a single word. Finally, after nearly 2 hours, the chair cleared his throat. The committee now recognizes Senator John Kennedy for questioning. A visible ripple passed through the room. Cameras pivoted. A few aides leaned forward as if watching a slow-motion collision. Kennedy stood slowly, slid his index cards aside, and adjusted his glasses. When he spoke, his voice carried that unmistakable Louisiana drawl, warm, deceptively relaxed, the voice of a man you underestimated right before he dropped a verbal hammer. Representative Omar, he began politely, I've listened to you this morning with the same attention I give a crawfish boil, and that's a lot. A few people chuckled nervously. But I want to ask you something simple. Not complicated. Won't take long. He paused, letting the silence sink in until the room held its breath. Ma'am, why did you give 3 different explanations for the same relationship? Omar straightened. I did not give 3 explanations. My statements were contextualized based on different. Kennedy held up a finger. Not rudely. Just firmly enough that she halted mid-sentence. Let me try this another way, he said. Maybe I'm as confused as a goat on AstroTurf. That's possible. But I've read your statements. I've read your emails. And I've read the transcript from your interview on Monday. And each time, ma'am, your story changed. That is incorrect, she replied quickly. If you look closely at. Oh, I have looked closely, he said, narrowing his eyes with that trademark blend of charm and danger. Ma'am, I looked so closely I damn near got cross-eyed. A ripple of laughter broke out in the room. Omar exhaled and tried to steer the conversation back. Senator, the organization you're referring to was involved in humanitarian aid. I made that clear. Any interactions I had were entirely unrelated to political. Kennedy leaned forward slightly. Then why, he said slowly, emphasizing each word, did you tell reporters last week that you had never even met anyone from that group, when this here email, he tapped the paper, shows you signed off on a meeting agenda with them? Omar's face tensed. I explained already, the term, never met, was in reference to formal engagement. This email was informal. Ma'am, a meeting is a meeting, he said. If I go to a fish fry, I don't tell folks later that I've never been near fried fish. Another wave of laughter. Even a couple of committee members who supported Omar suppressed smiles. She adjusted the microphone. Senator, you are oversimplifying a very complex. No, ma'am, he interrupted again, gently but immovably. I'm talkin', your words at face value. Which, if I'm bein' honest, has gotten harder and harder as this mornin' goes on. Omar blinked, caught between indignation and restraint. I have been truthful. And then Kennedy delivered the line. The line that would explode across social media within minutes. The line that would be replayed again and again for the next week. The line that felt like a sledgehammer delivered with a smile. Ma'am, he said calmly, I'm not sayin' you're lyin'. I'm just sayin' every time you answer, the truth gets further and further away from where it started. The room froze. No one breathed. The sentence landed like an earthquake. Clean, clever, cutting deeper than accusation ever could. It implied everything while stating nothing directly. It questioned not her facts, but her credibility, and in Washington, that was far more devastating. Omar's expression flickered. For a split second her composure cracked, frustration flashing in her eyes before she caught herself. She opened her mouth to respond, but the damage had already been done. The committee members shifted uncomfortably. The reporters began typing furiously. Someone in the back whispered, "Oh my God." Kennedy continued, his tone controlled, almost gentle. I'm just trying to understand, Representative. If your story changes 3 times in 1 week, how is the American public supposed to know which version is the real one? She inhaled sharply. Senator, there is only one version. The correct one. And I have outlined it repeatedly. He leaned back, folded his hands, and delivered the final blow with a tone so polite it felt surgical. Well, ma'am, if this is the correct version, maybe you should have started with it. Omar's jaw tightened. The room erupted in whispers. Even the chair needed a moment before restoring order. Kennedy set his papers down, as if his part was finished. But he wasn't done, not yet. One more thing, he added softly. Trust is like a glass of sweet tea. Once you spill it, you can't just scoop it back in and pretend it's the same. He nodded once, signaling he had concluded his questioning. The effect was immediate and brutal. Omar attempted a rebuttal. She clarified. She defended. She pushed back. But no response seemed to stick. Every explanation sounded like another version, another layer, another complication. Not because her points weren't valid, but because Kennedy's line had reframed the entire hearing around credibility. The cameras were no longer capturing facts. They were capturing reactions. Within minutes, clips of Kennedy's remark were uploaded. On Twitter, the quote trended under 3 different hashtags. Commentators dissected it. Memes popped up. Cable news prepared breaking news banners for their evening broadcasts. The hearing sputtered forward, but the momentum had shifted irrevocably. By the time the chair adjourned the session, Omar exited quickly, her aides forming a protective bubble around her. Reporters shouted questions she didn't answer. One camera caught her pinching the bridge of her nose in frustration before disappearing behind a door. Kennedy, on the other hand, walked out calmly, as if he had spent the afternoon discussing barbecue recipes instead of political combat. An aide jogged up behind him. Senator, do you want to issue a comment to the press? Kennedy chuckled lightly. Son, I already said everything I needed to say. That evening, the storm intensified. The clip played on every major network. Commentators on both sides debated whether Kennedy had crossed a line or simply spoken a harsh truth. Supporters praised his clarity. Critics called it grandstanding. But regardless of interpretation, one fact was undeniable. His one line had become the defining moment of the entire controversy. Overnight, newspapers published editorials. Social media boiled. Donors, strategists, activists, everyone had an opinion. Satirists turned it into skits. Political talk shows played it on loop. By morning, pundits were openly questioning Omar's political future in a way they hadn't before. Not because of the allegations themselves, but because her credibility, her greatest defense, had taken a direct hit. The following weekend, a major political magazine ran a cover story titled, "The Line That Changed Everything." Inside, analysts explained why Kennedy's comment had stuck so powerfully. Not because it was cruel. Not because it was witty. But because it had framed her contradictions in a way no counter-argument could undo. A single sentence had overtaken every explanation she gave. And in politics, perception often mattered more than evidence. Privately, Omar vented to her staff. He reduced hours of testimony to one sentence, she said bitterly. One sentence. And people will believe that over everything else I said. Her communications director nodded sympathetically. It's the clip effect. People react to moments, not explanations. She sighed heavily. Well, we're going to have to fight this. And they did. She gave interviews, released a lengthy statement, pushed back hard against what she called a misleading and oversimplified narrative. But the narrative had already escaped her grasp. The line had gone viral. It had become the story. And it would shadow her career for months. As for Kennedy, when asked later if he regretted delivering the now infamous sentence, he shrugged with his trademark deadpan expression. Well, he said, if telling the truth ends somebody's career, maybe that says something about their career. The clip of that comment went viral too. But it was the first line, the one uttered quietly in the middle of that tense committee room, that became legend in Washington. A line that would be quoted for years. A line that changed the trajectory of a hearing. A line that, in the eyes of millions watching around the world, ended Ilhan Omar's political dominance in one public moment of complete rhetorical destruction. And all John Kennedy had needed was one sentence.